Today's episode is a lot like your ex. Is it time to forgive them and get back with them? Or is it time to forget them and move on? We're going to be talking about 6 different players in which we're going to debate, should you forgive them or forget them in fantasy football this year? Welcome in Lucas Wenzel and Cameron Lawrence hanging out with you today. Cameron got a good kick out of that.
I did. We don't rehearse those going into it, so it's always I never know what's coming. Today's got to be a little bit. I like that one.
I've been trying to get better. You know, they talk about attention getters, right?
Yes.
And I
That
don't
caught
want to
my
just be
attention.
right. It's like I don't want to just like dive in here and give you the clickbait 5 players you must draft, and like we'll talk about that in some videos, but I gotta get a little creative here. But no Tyler Platt. His excuse, again, we're going to rag on him a little bit. His excuse is a flat tire. I mean, you come up with all these cliche reasons you can't show up on the show, and he just feeds us another one to rag him for. It's too easy.
It was brutal. I mean, he timed it out right. I mean, he waited till 45 minutes before we were going to record too. So like he fully committed to the bit there.
He really did. He won't be missed today. No, we'll miss Ty on this episode, but we're going to talk about 6 different players and their 2023 seasons were worth forgetting. And we're going to debate, should you actually forget them in 2024 or are they worth forgiving and being back in on? So let's dive in to those 6 players. So we got a well-rounded bunch here. We got 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a quarterback, and a tight end we are going to talk about on today's episode. And the first one I think is actually fascinating. When I was thinking about players to include in this episode, this player was not the first one in my mind, but the more I thought about him and the more I thought about where he's ranked for me this season, I thought he is a perfect candidate because I think there's a wide variety of opinions on the newly paid Rhamondre Stevenson, running back for the New England Patriots. Look, last year, not great. Okay, he only played 12 games. He was a running back 28 in fantasy points per game after being drafted as the running back 11. In those 12 games, he only had more than 50 rushing yards in 4 of them. So he had less than 50 or less rushing yards, in literally that would be 66% of his games last year, 8 of 12 games.
Yeah.
That's not good. Did I do my math right there? I feel like no, that's right. Yeah. 2 out of 3. I did my math right. He was outscored. I'm sorry, I had to take a detour for that one. He was outscored through the first 5 games last year. He was outscored by Jaleel McLaughlin, Dameon Pierce, and Khalil Herbert.
Oof.
Not great, John. But then, he bounced back though, because in weeks 6 through 12 before he got injured, in week 13, he was a running back 15 in fantasy points per game while drawing the 7th most targets. So you look at his situation going into 2024, he just got a fresh contract. He just got paid, which was, I think, the big question all offseason long was, are the New England Patriots going to commit to him? But they also bring in pass catching specialist Antonio Gibson as well. So are you willing to forgive Rhamondre this year, Cameron, or do you think it's worth forgetting about him?
I am, to a point, right? Like I don't think we're necessarily going to see a rebound back to that running back 14 finish. Actually, I think he was running back 9 in PPR formats in 2022, because that was mainly on the back of 88 targets, 70 receptions. I don't see that again, just because, like you said, brought in Antonio Gibson. We kind of saw that with Zeke last year, getting some of that receiving work. He saw 50 targets in 12 games, but if I doing my math right, that's a 65 target pace through 17 games ish. So I mean, can still see a pretty decent amount. But the yards per attempt dipped last year. In 2022 he was around 5 yards per attempt. Last year he was back down to 4, and I assume we're going to stay. He's going to be closer to that lower end of the threshold. Just seeing this Patriots team. Because unless Drake May is phenomenal to start, you're not really respecting the pass too much in New England. There's not a threat on the outside you're worried about right now. So I think with kind of all of that in mind, I'm back in at his current ADP. I'm not out on Rhamondre. I don't mind taking him around that running back 20 range. I just don't think we're going to see a huge explosion back up to potentially being a top 10 guy.
I'm so concerned about the touchdowns. I really am.
Yes.
I just don't think this team is going to find themselves in scoring position enough. Now, I understand there's other running backs in the league who don't need the touchdown volume, right? They can just do it on the back of, like Alvin Kamara, right? He just does it on the back of a crap ton of targets. But that's what Alvin Kamara is great at, is he draws a crap ton of targets. He's the second best pass catcher for the New Orleans Saints. Now, we could probably go as far as saying Rhamondre Stevenson, he might be the second best pass catcher on the New England Patriots.
The best pass catcher.
Right, he could be right. But that requires him to actually get the volume. And when you bring in a guy like Antonio Gibson, who I'm going to fact check myself here, I believe was top 10 in targets last year on the Washington Commanders. I am pulling up that page right now just to fact check myself. He was 16th in targets last year. He drew 59 targets last year. Nearly top 15 in targets still. I just don't see a world where Rhamondre again gets back to that 80 plus mark that you like to see. Now, Rachaad White is another great example, right? Doesn't need to score a lot of touchdowns. He only scored 6 on the ground last season, but he caught 3 through the air. And the other thing with Rachaad White that Rhamondre Stevenson, I don't think is going to get this year is that Rachaad White got literally every single running back rush attempt. 272 totes for Rachaad White. I don't think you're going to get that with Rhamondre Stevenson. I personally am willing to forget Rhamondre Stevenson this year. I mean, I've got him way down in my rankings compared to you two. I have him as my running back 30. You both have him at running back 20. And I just think when you bring in a guy like Antonio Gibson who can get it done in the receiving game with a rookie quarterback who I don't think is going to get this team in scoring position often enough, I just don't see what Rhamondre Stevenson is going to. I think he's going to be good at a lot of things. He's not going to excel in the one thing. He's not going to get a ton of volume. He's not going to score a ton of touchdowns. He's not going to see, elite 75 plus targets this year. He'll get close in all of them, but I just don't see a world where, he returns on running back 20. Like, I think he's like at best, I'm thinking, he's like a fringe running back too, the running back 22, 23, 24 range. But I've got him all the way at running back 30.
Yeah, the contract gave me a little bit of just comfort knowing that I think the volume is going to continue to be there for sure this year, and in Dynasty even gave me a little bit of comfort there. But so that gave me that just reassurance. That's why I have him closer to running back 20. I think he's going to get enough volume on the ground to keep him around that range. But like you said, I mean, his career high for a season is 6 total touchdowns. Right. I mean, he had 5 on the ground and 1 through the air that season. So he's just never been a touchdown guy. And I mean, to be fair, he might be. He's just been on the New England Patriots with, the Mac Jones experience. So we just haven't been able to see if he actually is.
So we'll agree to disagree there.
Yep.
I get the argument is there, right? If you want to follow the money, follow the money. It's usually not a bad bet. And if I do some shifting in my rankings, again, I look at guys like right now in my rankings where, I might have them like actually low compared to their ADP, and I don't try to adjust to meet ADP because that's just silly. Oh my goodness.
Whoa.
A verb came
through. That was a roar.
Shout out to Kirkland Signature Sparkling Water for that intermission there. Oh my goodness. I've never had that happen on an episode before. Normally I can mute myself in time.
Flip
it's like, all right, put that one out. Oh, that's too funny. But no, the thing with Rhamondre is I'll go back and I'll probably end up tweaking a few things, give him a few more carries in his favor, a few more targets in his favor, and that'll make him a riser in my rankings. But I question if I'll get him any higher than like the running back 24 this year, just because I am concerned about some of those volume things. Let's move on to a different position now. This is a guy who I think everybody got burned by last year. I was a huge advocate, but I mean the injuries were just brutal at the start of the year for Cooper Kupp. That really took him out of that early round contention. People were saying, oh yeah, we can ignore it. He'll bounce back. He's still worth a top 5 wide receiver pick in your drafts. And he was going as the wide receiver 7 last year, right? But what he ended up being was the wide receiver 25 in fantasy per game, right? He missed those first 4 games of the season, as I mentioned. He also sat out week 18. The big thing here, though, with Cooper Kupp is that Puka just took a stranglehold of this wide receiver room, and he did not look back, because now you're looking at him in ADP. Puka's going as the wide receiver 7 off boards right now, and Cooper Kupp is going as the wide receiver 22. But what say you? This is a prolific pass offense. Still got Matthew Stafford at the helm, who I actually think is probably one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the NFL at the moment. I actually think the Los Angeles Rams offense is one of the most underrated in the NFL at the moment. So there could be a lot of things that go right here for Cooper Kupp in 2024, but we have to recognize he might actually be second fiddle to Puka Nacua now. But are you willing to forgive Cooper Kupp this year, Cameron, or is it time to forget him?
I think I'm willing to forgive Cooper Kupp. I know for sure. Whoa. Ooh. Now I got stuff stuck in my throat. I know for sure that
what an episode. What an
episode. It is
episode.
crazy. It's just we're getting wild on you guys. I know for sure through between all of us fellas, I have Kupp the highest. And a big part of it is I still believe that Cooper Kupp has it. I still believe that he is as good, maybe not quite as good as he was his crazy season, but I still believe that that he hasn't really lost a step. He still averaged 8 targets a game. I believe when those two were on the field at the same time, Puka and Cooper Kupp, Puka had 100 targets, Kupp had 99. I think when Kupp's fully healthy, when they both get an off season, I think they can be comparable. I'm not projecting either of them to get 170 plus targets this season, but based off where he's going, what did you say? Wide receiver 22 right now?
Yep.
I think he could easily finish closer to a high-end wide receiver 2 than where he's going based off of, like you said, the volume that's going to be in this offense, how underrated this offense is, and the fact that he does have Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford, calling the plays and throwing him the ball.
Yeah, I'm willing to forgive Cooper Kupp at cost. Right, at wide receiver 22 right now, I'm willing to forgive him at that price. The gamble I don't like making with Cooper Kupp, though, is that, he's a 31-year-old wide receiver. I mean, he literally just turned 31 like last week. So he's on the wrong side of 30. I hate playing this game where we hold on to these peak seasons from these players, because look what he just did 3 years ago.
Yeah.
It's that was 3 years ago. Cooper Kupp was 27, 28 back then. He was in the prime of his career. That's when we typically see these wide receivers peak. So of course we finally saw that from him then. So he's on the wrong side of 30. I don't like that. I also just think with Puka Nacua breaking out, literally his first year in the league, and I know they're very similar in a lot of facets. I would much rather bet on the youth there, but that's also why they're going, 16, 17 wide receivers apart right now. But, for where I have Cooper Kupp in my rankings, he is my wide receiver 25, and he's a part of that massive tier, basically of guys from the wide receiver 15, to my wide receiver, 20, really my wide receiver, 28, 29, where they're all separated by 12 fantasy points. Mm-hmm. So if you bump Kupp, handful of more targets, shoot, if you even give him a touchdown, he jumps up 4 spots in my rankings. So at cost, I think he could easily outperform this ADP. I just don't want people to think when we talk about Cooper Kupp, we're talking about him as a guy who can have a Triple Crown season, as a guy who, can return to this peak form top 10 option. I'm not promising you that whatsoever. But what I am saying is, wide receiver 22, even though he's my wide receiver 25 right now, depending on what my team needs, I am perfectly fine drafting him there, knowing that his upside probably is a top 15 option.
Yeah, I honestly see him similar light to a Devonta Smith, a Jalen Waddle, one of those guys who is the wide receiver 2 on their team. I think the difference for me on Kupp is I do think he has that potential to be the wide receiver 1 on this team, right? I'm not banking on it. I'm not, when I'm taking him there, I'm not betting, hey, he's still the wide receiver 1, because like you said, we can't discount what Puka did last year at all. I mean, what he did as a rookie was ridiculous. but I do think that he still holds the upside of those guys in that range, which for me is like when we talk to a best ball drafts and you're trying to, get the variety on your team. So you're kind of have it spread out for these tournaments. I'm taking similar amounts of Cooper Kupp as I am to Devonta Smith, as I am to Jalen Waddle, and some of those other wide receiver twos in that range.
Which I think is reasonable, because even though he's got the age, there's something about a savvy vet we all kind of like as well. And I don't think we should just continue to discount these guys because they're getting older. Like, again, Mike Evans is a guy last year, right? I think he was one discounted all the way down to like the wide receiver, 30. He was mid 30s last year, basically. And, what does he go out and do? He puts up a top 10, top 12 season. And I'm not saying that's necessarily what's going to happen with Cooper Kupp. I'm just saying, when we discount these guys far enough, eventually they become values. And I think this Rams offense is too good to not forgive Cooper Kupp, for last year, coming off of an injury to start the year. And now I think you get a full off season of this offense clicking together with Puka Nacua, probably as the one, in my opinion. But it's worth forgiving Cooper Kupp.
Definitely.
Let's talk one more guy, then go to break, Cameron. Kyle Pitts, the Atlanta Falcons. He's going to be one that I think we're going to continue banging our heads against a wall on for the next at least 2.5 months before the regular season starts. We've been banging our heads against the wall about Kyle Pitts ever since they said Kirk Cousins is going to the Atlanta Falcons. Now, in terms of dynasty, this is a very different conversation. Obviously, as a dynasty asset, I think Kyle Pitts is worth investing in. But in terms of redraft this year, Kyle Pitts has burned you, back-to-back seasons now at this point. He's a tight end 16 in fantasy points per game last year. He only averaged 8.1 fantasy points per game, yet he was drafted as a tight end 7. And what's crazy that this year he's being drafted as a tight end 6. We're drafting him earlier than last year, despite all the times Kyle Pitts has made us want to rip our hair out, has made us want to send troll messages to the DMs of Arthur Smith saying you're a punk. Actually, people probably didn't even send troll ones. They probably sent legitimate ones to the guy for how upset they were with him. I mean, this is a guy who should be in the elite tight end conversation, we should be talking about him like a Sam Laporta, a Trey McBride at this point in his career, because this is what he was drafted to be. This is what he was projected to be as a prospect. Yet we're asking the question of, should we forgive him, or do we need to ditch Kyle Pitts like a bad habit? So what about you? Which side do you fall on?
I want to forget him, but I'm going to end up forgiving him. And it really comes down to what you said. The upside is so undeniable for Kyle Pitts. The athleticism. Now the offense with the quarterback, right? I mean, Kirk Cousins targets TJ Hawkinson like no tomorrow. Now he comes over, he's got Kyle Pitts, who, is just going to be crazy athletic. But the hard thing is, like you said, we just haven't seen it from Pitts. His rookie season was his best year. I mean, he had 110 targets, which is great, but then he only had 1,000 yards, but he only had 68 receptions and 1 touchdown. His high on a season is 3 touchdowns right now. So it's just like, is this team going to score more touchdowns than it has in the past 3 seasons? Yes. Without a doubt, yes. Even if I believe even if Kirk gets hurt for game 1 and Michael Penix has to come in, this team is going to score more touchdowns than they have in the past 3 seasons. So I don't think 3 touchdowns is his cap, but it's just like, we just haven't seen it fully put together for Kyle Pitts. And so we're purely banking on the upside right now, which is why I want to forget him, why I want to be out. But it's just like, man, if I'm out and I'm wrong, I'm going to feel like an absolute fool, because all the signs are there that this should be an amazing year for Kyle Pitts. So I'm going to end up forgiving him, but I really want to forget him.
Kyle Pitts is your toxic ex. That's what
he is. That's like, what I was going to say. That's what I felt like I was describing right there.
Yeah, Kyle Pitts is your toxic ex. It is not. It's not the like, oh, you know what? Morally, we just believe in different things, and it's like a mutual parting of way. This is like, 2 a.m. Like, oh my gosh,
been gaslighting us for 3 years.
Right? Do I need to text him? Like, I'm waiting for the "you up" text from Kyle Pitts, because as soon as he texts me that, like, I'm headed over there, right? Like, which I hate, because I am going to forgive Kyle Pitts this year. I really am, because the big discrepancy that we've all talked about for Kyle Pitts is that, my gosh, can someone deliver him an accurate football?
Yeah.
I mean, we look at the area, like oh my gosh, for the longest time, I hated all the tweets about Kyle Pitts air yards. And it's listed all the air yard stats, right? And I'm like, none of these matter unless if he has a quarterback to deliver him the football. Yeah. Throw it in the air, have him run, post routes all he wants. But unless if someone can deliver him the football, these are just empty stats. I mean, again, you look at his rookie season, second in air yards, second in air yard share, second in average depth of target, third in deep targets. 2022, fifth in air yards, first in air yard share, second in ADOT, first in deep targets. And you even look at last year. You ready for this? First in air yards, first in air yard share, first in average depth of target, first in deep targets. I mean, there are explosive plays waiting to happen for Kyle Pitts. I mean, when we talk about Travis Kelce, drafting him as a wide receiver for your fantasy team, this is what you should be getting with Kyle Pitts, is a wide receiver at the tight end position on your fantasy team. Nobody has been able to deliver him an accurate football, though. I mean, his catchable target rate last year was at 64%. That was 37th of all tight ends. He was 37th in 2022. He was 11th his rookie season, which was the last time we were actually somewhat happy with Kyle Pitts. But considering he hasn't been top 35 in catchable target percentage over the last 2 years is just dumbfounding.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Kyle Pitts, I am up. I'll come over. I'm willing to forgive you one more time. But this is probably, unless if you make some magic happen, this is probably a one-night stand and I'm done with you after this year.
Yeah, I got to say, looking at those advanced stats of Kyle Pitts, the worst stat for him is the freaking snap share.
Yes.
How can he be that athletic, that amazing? And you only got him on the field 65% of the time. I understand Arthur Smith wants to run the ball. He needs a blocking time. I understand. Everyone's going to say that. But man, 65% of snaps, that's it. I mean, that's just brutal. That's awful.
And you got to imagine with a new regime coming in, they're not going to take Kyle Pitts off the field just because Arthur Smith wants to run the crap out of the football and wants
with
to.
Tyler Algier, not even with Bijan. Oh my god!
Right. You have to imagine some of that tomfoolery is going to recorrect itself this year. Yep. So let's take a quick break, Cameron. We'll be back with three more players and debate whether we should forgive them or forget them in 2024. Alrighty, we are back. We've talked about Rhamondre Stevenson, Cooper Kupp, and Kyle Pitts, whether we are willing to forgive or forget them in 2024. We were split on Rhamondre. We were both back in on Cooper Kupp, and against our wills, are kind of back in on Kyle Pitts. That's what
we've been gaslit back into Kyle Pitts.
we really have been. So let's talk about another guy who, honestly, I feel like he's kind of the Kyle Pitts of wide receivers.
Yeah.
Just in terms of how we've been gaslit on him, the upside we know he possesses. It's Tee Higgins, the Cincinnati Bengals. Man, this dude is so talented. He finishes the wide receiver 42 in fantasy points per game last year. I mean, it was awful. Only 11.7 points per game. You drafted him as a wide receiver 15 last year, which just makes this all 10 times worse because everybody was excited about this Bengals offense again last year. Look, he missed week 5. He basically only played half the games in weeks 4 and week 6. He missed week 10 through 12 as well. He misses half of week 17. You had Joe Burrow gone in week 11 for the rest of the season. I mean, it was truly a nightmare season for the Cincinnati Bengals. Nothing went right for this team. I also want to remind people that back in 2022, though, Tee Higgins was the wide receiver 16 in fantasy points per game. So this was only really 1 year removed from that season. And I'm not trying to, make this my Cooper Kupp hold on to the triple crown kind of take, because I think this is very different, because this is a guy who we know is uber talented, who is in a an incredibly efficient offense that is willing to push the ball downfield. But you have to question how healthy Joe Burrow's wrist is going to the season. I mean, the injury that he sustained is literally one that linebackers, sustain. Joe Burrow he's not learning how to rethrow, but he came out and said, some days I feel great. Other days, it feels like crap to throw the football. So it's going to be interesting to see the long-term effects of this wrist injury for Joe Burrow. But in terms of Tee Higgins, Cameron, are you forgiving him or forgetting him in 2024?
I'm really struggling to forgive him. I'm going to be honest. It's been rough. It's been a tough, this is the year that he's going to break out, like 2021, I mean, his rookie season, you were very happy with it because, right, we weren't expecting a ton from Tee Higgins' rookie season. And then that second year, it's like, okay, he looked really good with Ja'Marr Chase. He played 14 games, still had over 1,000 yards, still had 74 receptions. Then the next year, he had pretty much the same exact stat line, except he played 3 more years. Then last year was just completely disappointing. And so it just feels like, are we ever actually going to get there? And unlike Kyle Pitts, he's had the offense, right? He's had Joe Burrow. He's had, Ja'Marr Chase on the other side. So like, it's just, I don't know if I can truly get there, right? I think I can take him at ADP. I think if he if he's at that wide receiver 28, I think I'm okay taking him at cost, but I'm not taking him any higher, and I'm really not overly excited about getting Tee Higgins there. I feel like at this point, if I miss Tee Higgins in a draft, I'm not gonna be like, dang, that stinks. Whereas like if I'm targeting Kyle Pitts, like don't want one of those first 5 tight ends, and I miss on Kyle Pitts, I'm kind of like, that stinks. I don't love any other tight ends right after him personally. Whereas Tee Higgins, I'm like, man, I'll just take Amari Cooper. I'll take Christian Kirk. I'll take, 15 other wide receivers who I view the same as Tee Higgins. So I'm not forgetting him, but I'm not like fully forgiving him at this point.
I feel like I'm back on the forgive. I feel like I've already forgiven Tee Higgins. I'm already back on the forgiveness train, which I'm a little bit scared by. So when I finished my initial projections, Tee Higgins came back as my wide receiver 28. I said, interesting. I'm surprised I have Tee Higgins that low, considering, I do like a big bounce back season for the Cincinnati Bengals offense this year. It can't all go wrong again this year, right? It all can't go wrong again. And so what did I filtered Tee Higgins 8 more targets. I subtracted, 1 or 2 from a handful of different players, where it really doesn't make a difference on them. But, if they all get funneled to Tee Higgins, it makes a little bit of a difference for him. Tee Higgins went from my wide receiver 28 to my wide receiver 16.
That's
from
wild.
21 to 129 targets. That's all I changed. I didn't change touchdowns. I didn't change yards per reception. I didn't change catch percentage. Boost himself up 12 spots in my wide receivers. And I don't think it's crazy to think that Tee Higgins has, 130 target season. You don't have Tyler Boyd there anymore. Now I hear people saying, well, Jermaine Burton is going to soak up all 98 of Tyler Boyd's targets. And I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit on that one. We're talking about an unproven rookie, as the third wide receiver option in that offense, who sure could probably be filtered 85 targets this year. I wouldn't be surprised by that, but let's not pretend that, Tyler Boyd or the Tyler Boyd's absence, is just Jermaine Burton's role to have. That's just lazy in terms of, one guy comes in and soaks up absolutely everything. That's just not how the NFL works, right? That's not very practical. So I think Tee Higgins does absorb some of those, and I think it is possible. He has an upwards of 130 target season. The other thing neither of us have brought up about Tee Higgins yet is this trade saga isn't over. He's signed his franchise tag. Doesn't mean he can't be traded and sign a new contract with another team next year.
That's true.
that's not out of the cards. He can still get. I mean, now it depends. Is the Carolina Panthers that much better of a landing spot
Yeah.
than the Cincinnati Bengals? Right? Are you really going to expect? Does the 150 targets make up for the 130 in a better offense in Cincinnati? Right? But there is a world where the Steelers have been thrown around in rumors for Brandon Ayuk specifically, not Tee Higgins, but there's a world where Tee Higgins isn't actually a Cincinnati Bengal and ends up in alpha on an offense as well.
That's true.
So there is also that world where we can say, yeah, he's been injured constantly. The best ability is availability. I'm kind of tired of hearing that one though, because that just sounds like think what you're talking about in terms of predicting injuries. And let's just be honest, we all thought Nick Chubb was invincible last year, and guess what? He isn't, right? Like, none of us can guess when these injuries are going to pop. And can they be concerns? Absolutely. Like, I don't blame somebody for saying, like, I'm not going to forgive Tee Higgins because that dude cannot stay on the football field. And every game after an injury, like, he plays 28. They say he's completely healthy, and then he only plays like 28% of the snaps, right? So I get if people want to forget Tee Higgins because of that, but man, with the upside this dude has, seeing he's already finished as a top 20 wide receiver in fantasy points per game in years past, to get him at the wide receiver 28 right now, I think there's too much talent, there's too much upside. This offense is too good for him to fail you at that ADP. But it is a concern. Can he stay on the field? I'm going to choose to overlook that a bit because I choose to, unless if you have, like, Raheem Mostert is the perfect example, right? Because he was the improbable guy last year where everybody knew that dude, same ankle, same kind of injury every single season. And you were getting there with Tee Higgins. If it happens this year, we're going to have to write him off. So again, this is why I say he's kind of like the Kyle Pitts of wide receivers. It's like, it's kind of last ride for Tee Higgins, but I'm definitely more excited about him than I am for Kyle Pitts, mostly because you don't have to worry about paying, essentially you don't even have to pay a wide receiver 2 price tag for Tee Higgins right now. He's going as a wide receiver 28 versus Kyle Pitts. He's your starting tight end, and you got to live with that. For sure. Tee Higgins, you at least can bench him for another option because he's not, one of your top 2 wide receivers are starting every single week, most likely.
Yep.
I feel like I went on a little bit about Tee Higgins there, but he has so many layers to him this year where I think it's worth unfolding the majority of them.
100%.
Let's move on to a position we haven't talked about yet, Cameron. That would only be the quarterback position. And now, man, this is a tough one because we are going to talk about Trevor Lawrence, and what makes him so difficult to talk about is that we now have this emerging landscape of quarterbacks that will be coming back this year where it's difficult to say, should we forgive or forget Trevor Lawrence? Because last year you drafted him as the quarterback 8. That obviously didn't pan out. That was a disastrous season for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Finished as a quarterback 17 in fantasy points per game. The catch is now, though, this year, you can draft him at the quarterback 17. But as I mentioned, we have a plethora of quarterbacks coming back now, right? We have Jordan Love, who has certified himself as, an emerging quarterback 1 in fantasy football. You have Dak Prescott, who, let's be honest, it looks like they're going to throw the football, probably at one of the highest rates in the league again this year. You have Kyler Murray, who's back from injury. You have Joe Burrow, who's coming back from an injury. You have Anthony Richardson, who's coming back from an injury. And I think you and I would both agree, had we known that level of upside from Anthony Richardson last year, but didn't know he was going to get hurt, we probably would have taken him ahead of Trevor Lawrence. You've got Jaden Daniels, who has incredible rushing upside as well. You got guys like Jared Goff, who've got 14 to 17 games indoors this year, who thrives in indoor games. I mean, there's a lot of different cases you can make against Trevor Lawrence, but at the end of the day, I don't know, do you still buy into the quarterback talent you saw coming out of Clemson that everyone had been touting since high school? Are you willing to forgive him based on just almost solely because of the profile? I know, 2022, he finished as a top 10 quarterback, correct?
Mm-hmm.
You have that to bank on at least. Is there any chance he gets back to that form? Are you willing to forgive him, or are we just willing to give in at ADP and say, let's forget him?
I am willing to forgive him. For me on Trevor Lawrence, it's tough. I understand the argument against him, right? Because this is year 4. Because at first we said, well, you got to throw out that rookie year as a reminder, like you said, and then he looks good. And then last year, like for me, it's Christian Kirk wasn't on the field. This team as a whole didn't look right. I don't think that's who Trevor Lawrence is. But I understand if you go, I've seen enough. We saw his peak. That's as good as he's going to get. Why I like Trevor Lawrence, why I'm back in on Trevor Lawrence, is he has enough of a rushing upside to be similar for me to what we've seen from Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, where he can go get you 300 rushing yards and 4 to 6 rushing touchdowns on a season, which I know doesn't sound like a ton, but when you think about it, that's an extra 45 to 50 fantasy points that you spread out over the season. That's almost 3 fantasy points per game right there that other quarterbacks like a Tua, a Jared Goff aren't going to give you in the same way. And we've seen from Trevor Lawrence where he looks good throwing the ball, right? I mean, he's just not quite always clicking. He's definitely got that upside of getting to 30 touchdowns. We've seen him have around 24, 25. I don't see a reason, if Brian Thomas can click, if Gabe Davis plays the same role he has, just give him another good deep threat coming down the field. Evan Ingram, He's got a good supporting cast where I think he can hit 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns this season. So yeah, I've forgiven Trevor Lawrence. I got him as my stinking quarterback 8, which is probably a little high. To be fair, if he throws for 70 less yards than I have him at, he moves back to my quarterback 11. So it's a right in that area is very congested for me. But yeah, he's one of my favorite guys. If I don't take a quarterback in the top 10, if Jordan Love, Dak Prescott, even Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray, one of those guys, I love being able to wait on Trevor Lawrence and getting him as my quarterback 1. So I've fully forgiven Trevor Lawrence.
I just went and looked at my quarterback rankings. I freaking have Trevor Lawrence as my quarterback 11. I couldn't believe that when I looked at it. I definitely thought I had him closer to 15. And I was going to say, yeah, I'm willing to forgive, but I don't have any, it's going to be the classic, it's a lot of thoughts, a lot of feelings.
Yeah.
Don't have anything statistical to back it up. And you're right. I really don't. But the one thing I will point to is that you're right. He hasn't been afraid to throw the football still. This is a guy who was 5th in air yards last year. Over 4,600 air yards last year, 5th best in the league. It's not like he's playing scared. It's not like he's not chucking the ball around the yard. His completion percentage is still hovering right around 66%. It's about league average. His yards per attempt is still about the same from 2022. We saw a dip in the passing touchdowns, but in terms of fantasy points per game, like Trevor Lawrence, was still hovering right around. He was better in 2022. Excuse me. I'm looking at player profile. I'm confused where player profile got their fantasy points per game because according to player profile, he was 13th last year, not 17th. I said that.
You know what? That's on me. I think because I probably counted Joe Flacco and Anthony Richardson in my points per game. So they probably have that. They got that minimum cutoff of, probably 8 or 10 points. So that's where that discrepancy would come in.
Right, but I still think but that's why I also don't like that, because I think you do have to factor in, the Anthony Richardsons, and I do think you have to factor in the Joe Flaccos, because it goes to show how much, during their time on the field, they probably were better than Trevor Lawrence, right?
Yeah.
I believe in the player of Trevor Lawrence, man. I just do. I don't think we've seen Trevor Lawrence at his best yet in the NFL. I really don't, and I firmly believe that. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and forgive Trevor Lawrence. It's a little bit of a painful one, but I do think there is top 12 quarterback upside here with him. And you know what? If your league is like one of my home leagues and quarterbacks just fly off the board at a rate that I'm typically more comfortable with, and I walk out with, a Trevor Lawrence and a Jaden Daniels, a Trevor Lawrence and a Jared Goff, I'm not going to be super upset with that, because I do think, if I can grab 2 guys who I think could be on the fringe of that quarterback 1 status, which I think Trevor Lawrence can be one of those guys, I'm willing to forget, that terrible season, that quarterback 17 fantasy points per game season last year.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, right? If Trevor Lawrence, I think we could say that felt like his floor last year. That felt pretty brutal. And so if you take him right as if you're taking him at 80 ADP last season, 17.3 points per game, that's still more points per game than Baker, Tua and Baker, who both finished as top 10 quarterbacks on the season just because they played all 17 games, right? So you're a 1 point per game less than CJ Stroud. Whoever it was like, oh my gosh, he's amazing. So it's not like you're that far off if he even hits his floor again this year. That's what the upside is okay, we saw last year he had 21 passing touchdowns and 14 picks. Okay, but he still he still had 339 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. So that's where that upside talk comes from with Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, and I think you're right. He is one of those sneaky rushing upside guys that you don't think about in that regard. Which I do think, again, Josh Norris talks about, the running points are your floor, and the passing upside is, all upside. Now, Trevor Lawrence isn't primarily a rushing quarterback, right? That's what we typically hear from a Jaden Daniels and Anthony Richardson and Kyler Murray, right? But to add that built-in insurance, maybe in this case, I think is so vital for Trevor Lawrence. Let's talk about one more guy, Cameron. We'll wrap it up here then. I'm really curious to see what you think about this player, because this player to me feels like the definition of bleh. Right? Like this is, I'm trying to think of like the girlfriend example. Like, the trend on socials where it's like, she's a 10, but puts bananas on her peanut butter sandwiches, right? Like, I feel like Najee Harris is like, he's a 10, but his targets have declined every single year, and he's the best season he's had in yards per attempt was 4.1, and they didn't pick up his 5th-year option. That's really what it is. Is he's a 10, but they didn't pick up his 5th-year option. Like, what does that make Najee Harris for you? Because right, I brought up all these things, right? He was the running back 32 in fantasy points per game last year. Disgusting. He was drafted as the running back 9. For whatever reason, people loved Najee Harris last year, and I couldn't understand for the world to me why that was the case. I will say it was a tale of two halves for Najee, though. In weeks 1 through 8, he was the running back 32. In weeks 9 through 18, then he was the running back 11. The targets have decreased for him, though, for 3 straight years now. He had 94, obviously, the monster rookie season. Only 53 in 2022, but then all the way down to only 38 targets last year. You have the emergence of Jaylen Warren now as well. He finished two spots ahead of Najee Harris in fantasy points per game last year. He's been the more efficient runner. He's averaged 5.1 yards per carry the last 2 seasons compared to Najee's 4. And Jaylen Warren has been more involved in the passing game. He saw 74 targets to Najee Harris's 38. Nearly doubled him up last year. But he got Arthur Smith coming to town, man. And you know what? Arthur Smith does some stupid things, like give the more inefficient running back the football, give the more bruising guy the football. Like, who knows what Arthur Smith can do? But what we do know is that it's typically favored running backs. So with Najee Harris currently going as the running back 24, are you willing to forgive him, or are you going to forget him?
I'm going to forget Najee Harris. And the main reason is because even if Najee Harris has a good year, returns on ADP, I don't feel like he has the upside to make me regret it, right? He's not going to all of a sudden finish as a top 10 running back this season. And a big part of it has to do with, like you said, those targets coming down. Those targets aren't all of a sudden going to jump way back up, because Jaylen Warren is still there, unless there is an injury or something like that. And we saw that last season with Arthur Smith even if Najee's playing well, that doesn't mean he's the go-to running back every single game. He's the bruiser, but I don't want the headache of, he's put up 15 points 3 weeks in a row. I'm finally real comfortable setting him in my lineup. And then all of a sudden, it's Jaylen Warren's turn for the next 3 games. Oh, there goes Najee, 7 points because he, doesn't catch the ball, didn't score a touchdown. And that's kind of what I think he's been relegated to. So I have him as my running back 27. I know his ADP is only the running back 24. But if I'm taking a guy in that range, I'd rather go like a Zach Moss there, understanding if he hits, there is a lot more room for for him to grow to be, the running back 15, where I don't think Najee necessarily has that in his range of outcomes this season.
Look, in a PPR format, I'm going to want Jaylen Warren, assuming, he sees the bulk targets he did last year. And the other thing I need from Najee Harris is that I need him to have, a Rashad White usage season on the ground. I need him to be a 270 carry guy in order to make up for the declining receiving work. I need him to continue scoring 8+ touchdowns every single year. I just don't know if I'm going to get that. Now, the offense improved. Sure, you can say Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are upgrades from Kenny Pickett, Mitchell Trubisky, and who am I missing out of that group? Mason Rudolph, right? I would say both of them are upgrades, but I just don't care about Najee at his current price. Like, I look at him and I say, I don't think you're mispriced, but why would I draft you? What upside do you give me here? Yeah. You could say the upside is the clear bell cow. I just think that Arthur Smith could do something stupid like that.
Yeah.
Or for a guy who's fifth year option they didn't pick up, I find it hard to believe they're going to make him the bell cow. And this feels like a game I've already played and lost before. I already played this with Zeke and Tony Pollard. Why do I want to play this again? Give me the younger guy who's been more efficient, who's been getting more receiving work, instead of the goal line thumper who sure can give me a top 20 finish, every third week.
Yeah.
But what about outside of that? Right? Who's going to give me more upside on a week-to-week basis? And it's going to be Jaylen Warren. So you're right. It's not that I think Najee is mispriced. I'm just willing to forget him because I don't think he has much to offer me this year. When I look at Jaylen Warren, though, I see a guy who could be a prolific pass catcher who is, more efficient on the ground. I think we'll have more opportunities for higher, a higher range of production of opportunities for fantasy points, right? The receiving work is really what I'm after with Jaylen Warren. And if it's going to continue declining for Najee Harris, the floor is so low for Najee. The ceiling is super low for Najee. The floor is, right around running back 25. And, the window is like running back 30 to running back 20 for Najee. That just doesn't excite me at running back 24.
Yeah. No, it's got a nice personality, but it's a decent situation, right. But that's what Najee is, right? The upside is just not there. If we're keeping up with our theme that we've had going on, that's what it comes down to. Is at the running back 25, I'd rather take somebody with a little bit more upside, who I think if it hits, I'm going to be very happy with them as a very, very solid running back 2 or high end. If they're my running back 3, I got multiple running back 2s on my team.
Yeah, I think it was generous to start with. Najee's a 10, but it's like,
Najee's a 6, but
he's a 7, but they did pick up his 5th-year option, right? That probably feels more appropriate for Najee. At any rate, anything you want to add before we close out here?
No, I don't think so. This one was a fun episode. I like this, a little back and forth one. This is gonna have to be a yearly episode for us moving forward.
I do think this should be a yearly episode because this brings in a group of guys that we typically don't like to talk about. We typically like to talk about the guys we're all in on, or the super fun, sneaky, explosive guys. And it's like, you get a few of those in here, but also it's like a bunch of guys that let's make an opinion on them finally.
Yes.
Right. Because these are all guys I feel like I've been hesitant to take firm stances on. And I think this helped me flush my thoughts out a little bit more. So I agree. I think this should be in the yearly rotation. If you want to see where we have all these players in our draft guide, you can find that down in the link in the description of the audio podcast or YouTube video you are watching. You can go to fellasdraftguide.com. You can pay $10 over there, or if you want to put that $10 towards a chance of not only getting our draft guide, but winning up to $1.5 million in Underdog Fantasy's Best Ball 5 contest. You can sign up for Underdog Fantasy using the code FELLAS. You will get a free square for their pick'em lobby. You will get a deposit match up to $250 in bonus cash, and our draft guide for absolutely free. So I think I'm just pointing it out. Your investment goes a little bit longer if you go deposit on Underdog. It doesn't just come straight to us. You can actually go try and invest that to draft teams and win even more money with that $10. So code FELLAS over on Underdog if you want our draft guide for absolutely free. We will send that to you weekly with fresh updates every Monday. We'll be back later this week with some ranking debates. We're going to wrap out our tight end redraft rankings this year as well tomorrow. some fun content coming up for you all. So make sure you don't miss it. Subscribe over at the audio podcast, the YouTube video, wherever you are watching. So much content coming out for you all every single day. And I haven't even mentioned the shorts, right? We've kind of like eased up on the shorts a little bit, but like come July, there's going to be a short every single day for you all.
Yes,
we are not going to miss that. So we will see you all later. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully Tyler will be back on Thursday to debate some rankings with us because I want to tell him how much his suck. Deuces.